The autumn rain drummed against the bus shelter where 9-year-old Aria Martinez huddled beside her mother, watching headlights blur through the wet glass. Elena Martinez checked her phone for the fourth time in as many minutes, anxiety tightening the corners of her eyes. 31 years old, working double shifts at the Seattle Medical Center, and still barely making rent on their studio apartment in the city's forgotten corners. The bus is late again, Aria observed quietly, her sketchbook protected under her thin jacket. She didn't complain about the cold or the wait. She'd learned early that complaints only added weight to her mother's already heavy burdens. Elena brushed damp hair from her daughter's forehead, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Just 10 more minutes, baby. Then we catch the transfer downtown. I have to work the gala tonight at the Prescott Museum. Triple pay, remember? That means we can finally fix the heating before winter really hits. Aria nodded, understanding the unspoken truth beneath her mother's words. Triple pay meant her mother would be on her feet for 12 hours straight. It meant another night of Aria hiding in supply closets or service corridors, staying invisible while wealthy people celebrated things they'd never struggled to obtain. But there was something else occupying Aria's mind, something she hadn't yet found the courage to tell her mother. Something that had started 3 months ago and was getting stronger, stranger, impossible to ignore. She could hear words that shouldn't make sense, and suddenly they did. It had begun with their upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Volkov, muttering angrily in Russian while struggling with grocery bags. Aria had understood every bitter complaint about American prices and her ungrateful son. Then the Ethiopian restaurant owner arguing with his supplier in Amharic, crystal clear. The Vietnamese grandmother at the park speaking to her grandson, every word comprehensible. At first, Aria thought she was remembering phrases she'd heard before, her brain assembling patterns. But yesterday, watching a French film in the library while waiting for her mother's shift to end, she'd realized the truth. She wasn't reading the subtitles. She didn't need them. She understood the dialogue as naturally as if they'd been speaking English. Something fundamental had changed in her brain, and she had no idea what it meant or what to do about it. The museum rose like a glass cathedral in downtown Seattle, its modern architecture reflecting the city lights in fractured geometric patterns. Elena led Aria through the service entrance, both of them dripping rainwater onto industrial flooring while security guards barely glanced their way. Staff were invisible here, expected but not acknowledged. Same rules as always, Elena whispered, helping Aria out of her wet jacket. Stay in the caterer's prep room. Keep quiet. Don't wander. If anyone asks, you're my assistant checking inventory. The prep room hummed with controlled chaos. Servers in crisp uniforms assembled canapés while bartenders mixed elaborate cocktails. Aria found her usual corner behind stacked crates of champagne glasses, pulling out her sketchbook and a pencil worn down to a stub. Through the swinging doors, she caught glimpses of the gala. A fundraiser for the museum's new international wing, attended by Seattle's tech elite, old money families, and visiting dignitaries from a dozen countries. The kind of event where a single donated sculpture cost more than Aria's mother would earn in 5 years. One man commanded attention the moment he entered. Not through volume or ostentation, but through the way others oriented themselves around him like planets around a sun. Dr. James Winters, Aria had heard the servers whispering. 52 years old, celebrated neuroscientist, billionaire pharmaceutical CEO, and the evening's guest of honor. His company had just achieved a breakthrough in neural mapping technology that promised to revolutionize brain science. Aria returned to her sketches, drawing impossible architecture and cities that existed only in her imagination. But her ears remained alert, cataloging the conversations drifting from the main gallery. That's when she heard them. 2 servers she'd never seen before, pushing a cart loaded with specialized equipment for the evening's signature cocktail demonstration. They spoke in low, urgent tones, using a language that Aria's mind immediately identified as Farsi. Persian dialect, probably Iranian. And she understood every single word. The compound is already in his system from the reception wine. The catalyst gets delivered through the champagne toast at 9:30. Once they combine, heart failure within 4 minutes. Completely natural looking for a man his age. The syndicate confirmed payment transfer. By tomorrow, his research goes to the highest bidder and his company collapses. Perfect revenge for what he did to their operations in Tehran. Make sure you're recording when it happens. They want proof of death for the final payment. Aria's pencil slipped from her fingers, clattering against the concrete floor. The two servers turned sharply, noticing her for the first time. Their eyes went cold and calculating, measuring whether a small girl in a worn sweater constituted a threat. One started moving toward her corner. Pure instinct propelled Aria from her hiding spot. She darted between confused catering staff, her small size an advantage as she slipped through gaps that adults couldn't navigate. The swinging doors burst open under her momentum, and suddenly she was in the main gallery, surrounded by evening gowns and tuxedos and shocked faces turning toward the running child. "Stop!" Aria screamed, her voice high and desperate. "Don't let him drink the champagne. They poisoned it. The two servers who aren't really servers." The elegant crowd froze in a tableau of confusion and aristocratic disapproval. But Dr. Winters, standing near the presentation stage with a champagne flute halfway to his lips, went absolutely still. His eyes found Aria with laser focus, and something in his expression suggested a mind already calculating possibilities most people wouldn't consider. "What did you say?" His voice carried authority that demanded answers rather than dismissal. "The two servers with the special cart," Aria gasped, pointing frantically. "They were talking in Farsi. They said they already gave you poison and the champagne has something that makes it work. They said you'd die in 4 minutes and someone called the syndicate would get your research." Museum security moved first, but Dr. Winters held up one hand, stopping them. His gaze never left Aria's face, studying her with the same intensity he probably used examining neural pathways under microscopes. "You speak Farsi?" he asked carefully. "I don't speak it. I just understand it. I understand all languages. It started happening a few months ago and I don't know why, but I heard them talking and you have to believe me." "I do believe you." Dr. Winters set down his champagne flute with deliberate care. "Marcus, run a full talk screen on me immediately. Jessica, secure those two servers and their tart. Nobody drinks anything until we know what we're dealing with." His head of security, a woman with military bearing and intelligent eyes, began issuing rapid commands. The two servers Aria had identified bolted for the nearest exit, but museum security, enhanced by Dr. Winters's private team, intercepted them before they reached the doors. Elena pushed through the crowd in a state of panic, grabbing Aria and checking for injuries while stammering apologies to anyone who would listen. "I'm so sorry, she shouldn't have been out here. I don't know what she thought she heard." She heard two operatives discussing a planned assassination using a binary poison system, Dr. Winters interrupted, crouching to Aria's eye level. She heard them speaking Farsi and understood enough to recognize the threat and act on it. Which raises several fascinating questions. He pulled out his phone, speaking briefly to someone on the other end while never breaking eye contact with Aria. Within minutes, a medical team arrived with portable testing equipment. The results confirmed trace amounts of a synthetic compound in Dr. Winters's bloodstream, harmless on its own but designed to become lethally toxic when combined with a specific catalyst. The catalyst they found in the champagne specially prepared for his toast. 4 hours later, Aria sat in Dr. Winters's private research facility adjacent to the museum, her legs swinging from a chair designed for adults while her mother paced near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Dawn was breaking over the water, painting the sky in shades of pearl and rose. "Your daughter exhibits spontaneous xenoglossia," Dr. Winters said, reviewing brain scans his team had conducted with Elena's terrified permission. "The ability to understand languages without prior exposure or learning. It's been documented in extreme medical literature, usually following brain trauma or during certain neurological events, but never with this level of comprehensive understanding." "Is she sick?" Elena's voice shook. "Is something wrong with her brain?" "Wrong? No. Different? Profoundly yes." Dr. Winters turned from his monitors, his expression somewhere between scientific fascination and genuine concern. "Her neural language centers show activity patterns I've never encountered. It's as if her brain has developed an ability to recognize and process the fundamental structures underlying all human language, bypassing the need for traditional learning." "Why?" Elena whispered. "Why would this happen?" "I don't know yet. But I intend to find out, if you'll permit me to study her development. Safely, ethically, with full transparency and your consent for every step." Aria watched the adults discuss her future, feeling oddly detached from the conversation. She'd spent months terrified that something was wrong with her, that she was broken or dangerous. Hearing a respected scientist call her different rather than damaged eased something tight in her chest. The people who tried to kill you, Elena said carefully. You said they're part of something called the Syndicate. Dr. Winters's expression hardened. An international criminal organization specializing in stealing and selling cutting-edge research to the highest bidder. They've been targeting my company for 2 years, ever since we achieved our breakthrough in neural mapping. Tonight was their most direct attempt yet. Which means they know Aria identified them. They know what she can do. Yes. Dr. Winters didn't soften the truth. Which means you're both in danger until we've completely dismantled their operational capacity to retaliate. Elena sank into a chair, the weight of their situation crushing her visible. We can't afford security. We can barely afford food. You're saying we need to just, what? Disappear? Live in fear. I'm saying I owe your daughter my life, and I pay my debts. Dr. Winters pulled up a document on his tablet. I'm offering you a position as coordinator for my foundation's community outreach programs. Housing in a secure building my company owns. Education for Aria that can help her understand and develop her abilities safely. Medical care, security, stability. In exchange for what? Elena's voice carried the wariness of someone who'd learned that nothing came without strings. For letting me try to understand what makes Aria extraordinary while keeping her safe in the process. For bringing your perspective to foundation programs that need input from people who've experienced real struggle rather than just studied it academically. For giving me the chance to do something that matters beyond profit margins and shareholder value. Elena looked at Aria, silently asking permission for the decision that would reshape their lives. Aria nodded slowly, recognizing something in Dr. Winters that her linguistic gift extended to reading emotional subtext. Loneliness beneath authority. Purpose-seeking direction. A brilliant mind that had solved countless scientific puzzles but had forgotten how to connect with simple human warmth. Okay, Elena agreed quietly. We'll try it. But if anything feels wrong, if Aria becomes uncomfortable, we walk away. Deal. Deal. The following months unfolded like a strange dream. Their new apartment occupied 2 floors of a renovated building near Green Lake, with actual bedrooms and windows that looked onto trees instead of alley walls. Elena's foundation work utilized her natural empathy and hard-won understanding of poverty's daily realities, designing programs that addressed real needs rather than wealthy assumptions. Aria attended a specialized private school where her differences were celebrated rather than feared. Her teachers, carefully selected and extensively vetted, encouraged her to explore her abilities while maintaining security around the true extent of her gift. As far as anyone outside Dr. Winters's inner circle knew, she was simply an exceptionally talented polyglot who studied languages conventionally. But in private sessions with Dr. Winters, the real work happened. Listen to this recording, he instructed one afternoon in his private lab, playing audio of 2 people speaking what Aria's mind identified as Georgian, the language of the former Soviet Republic. Tell me not just what they are saying, but what you perceive underneath the words. Aria closed her eyes, letting the foreign syllables wash over her. They are discussing business contracts, but the subtext is fear. The woman is being pressured to sign something she doesn't want to. The man is using language that sounds polite but carries implicit threats about her family's safety. She's trying to negotiate but knows she has no real power in this conversation. Dr. Winters made notes, his expression thoughtful. You're not just translating words. You're reading emotional context, power dynamics, cultural nuance. Your brain processes language as complete communication, not just vocabulary and grammar. Is that why I can understand everything so quickly? Because I'm hearing more than just the words. Possibly. The human brain is wired for pattern recognition. Most people learn languages by memorizing rules and vocabulary. Your brain seems to recognize the deeper patterns that underlie all human communication, allowing you to shortcut the traditional learning process entirely. Their sessions became highlights of Aria's week. Dr. Winters treated her like a colleague rather than a subject, explaining his research in terms she could understand, seeking her input on problems he was trying to solve. Elena sometimes joined them, her presence grounding the scientific exploration with maternal protectiveness. And gradually, something shifted in the dynamics between the adults. Elena had initially maintained careful distance, treating Dr. Winters with the same respectful wariness she'd applied to all wealthy people who'd briefly entered her life. But working on foundation programs revealed dimensions to his character that contradicted billionaire stereotypes. He listened more than he spoke. He admitted mistakes quickly. He deferred to her expertise on poverty and struggle without condescension. Late evening planning sessions in their apartment became regular occurrences. Dr. Winters would arrive with Thai food or Italian delivery, and they'd spread documents across the dining table while Aria did homework nearby. Conversations drifted from program design to personal history, from budget allocations to philosophical questions about privilege and purpose. "Did you always want this life?" Elena asked one night after Aria had gone to bed. They sat on the apartment balcony, the city lights spread below them like scattered stars. The companies, the research, the constant pressure. Dr. Winters swirled the wine in his glass, distant memories flickering across his face. "I wanted to matter. To prove I was more than the foster kid nobody expected to graduate high school, let alone revolutionize neuroscience. When you grow up with nothing, you develop specific hungers for significance. And now that you've achieved everything you set out to prove. Now I realize success tastes like ashes when you have no one to share it with who sees you rather than just your accomplishments or your wealth." Their eyes met, and something unspoken hung in the air between them. Not yet defined, but no longer ignorable. The fragile peace shattered 6 months into their new life when Aria failed to return from school. The security detail reported she'd been in her advanced literature class one moment, vanished the next, with surveillance footage showing a carefully orchestrated blind spot in camera coverage. Elena's phone rang within an hour. The voice on the other end spoke English with a heavy Eastern European accent, each word measured and threatening. "Your daughter is unharmed for the moment. She will remain so if Dr. Winters transfers his neural mapping research to our servers by midnight and publicly announces his retirement from all pharmaceutical development." Elena's hands shook so violently she could barely hold the phone. "Please, she's just a child. A child who can understand every conversation in every language. She is leverage, Ms. Martinez. Nothing more, nothing less. Midnight. No negotiations. No authorities." Dr. Winters materialized at their apartment within 15 minutes, his usual composed demeanor replaced by something harder, more dangerous. The brilliant scientist vanishing beneath the protective instincts of someone who'd learned to fight in foster homes and back alleys long before he'd learned to navigate corporate boardrooms. "I'm calling every resource I have," he stated, already mobilizing security teams, private investigators, and connections in law enforcement agencies. "We're finding her." They said no authorities. They can say whatever they want. I'm not letting them hurt Aria. Not for my research. Not for anything. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust his confidence and resources. But terror gnawed at her insides, memories of every worst-case scenario she'd ever imagined about losing her daughter playing in endless loops. Across the city, in an abandoned warehouse near the industrial waterfront, Aria sat in a windowless room with her hands zip-tied behind her back. Fear pulsed through her veins, but she forced herself to breathe steadily, to think rather than panic. She'd been listening since her capture. 3 guards, rotating shifts. They spoke primarily in Russian, occasionally switching to English or what her mind identified as Ukrainian. They were professionals, efficient and cold, treating her like valuable cargo rather than a human being. But they were also careless about what they said in her presence, assuming a 9-year-old couldn't understand their conversations in foreign languages. Aria had learned the warehouse location from an overheard phone call. She knew the syndicate's deadline. She understood their backup plans if Dr. Winters failed to comply. And she'd identified a potential weakness in their security protocol based on shift change timings and the guards' complaints about inadequate support staff. When one guard entered to provide food and water, Aria switched to fluent Russian, her accent perfect despite never having formally studied the language. "Your accent is from Volgograd region," she said calmly. "Your daughter is 11, named Katia. You send money home every month, but it's never quite enough, is it?" The guard froze, shock and suspicion warring across his face. "How do you know?" "I heard you talking to her on the phone. You're doing this for her, to give her opportunities you never had. But what do you think she'd say if she knew how you earned that money? If she knew you helped kidnap another father's daughter? It was a gamble, and Aria's heart hammered as she watched the guard's expression shift through confusion, anger, and something that might have been shame. I'm not. He started, then stopped. It's just business. Nothing personal. Kidnapping is personal to the people being hurt. You know that. You're not a bad person. You're just making bad choices because you're desperate. The guard stared at her for a long moment, then left without another word. But Aria noticed he didn't secure the zip tie quite as tightly when he checked her restraints, and he positioned himself during his shift where he couldn't easily see the service door she'd identified as the weakest security point. When Dr. Winters's rescue team breached the warehouse 9 hours later, they encountered minimal resistance. One guard had apparently experienced a sudden crisis of conscience, disabling internal alarms and leaving strategic doors unlocked. The others were professional enough not to fight when confronted with overwhelming tactical superiority. Aria ran into Elena's arms, both of them sobbing, while Dr. Winters watched with an expression Elena had never seen on his face before. Raw relief mixed with something deeper, more vulnerable than she'd believed him capable of showing. Later, after police statements and medical examinations and the gradual return of something resembling normalcy, Dr. Winters requested a private conversation with Elena in his office. Aria was safely with a trusted counselor, processing the trauma with professional support. This will happen again, he said without preamble, standing at his window overlooking the Seattle skyline. Different organization, different methods, but the pattern remains constant. As long as I'm developing valuable technology and Aria possesses her extraordinary ability, they are both targets. Elena felt her heart sink. Are you saying you're removing your protection? That we should go back to hiding? No. Dr. Winters turned to face her, and Elena saw exhaustion lines she'd never noticed before etched around his eyes. I'm saying the opposite. I'm asking you to marry me. Elena stared at him, certain she'd misheard. Legal protection, he continued, words tumbling out faster than his usual measured pace. If Aria is legally my daughter, the resources I can deploy for her security increase exponentially. My enemies would face consequences beyond simple retaliation. Corporate protections, family trust structures, international legal frameworks. You're proposing a marriage of convenience to protect my daughter. Yes. I know it's not romantic or traditional, but it's practical and it would provide. James. Elena crossed the space between them, her hand finding his arm. What if I said I want more than practicality? What if I said these last 6 months have meant something beyond just protection and obligation? Dr. Winters went absolutely still, hardly daring to breathe. Then I would tell you that every evening in your apartment has become the center of my week. That watching Aria grow and watching you build confidence and purpose has reminded me what it feels like to care about something beyond research papers and profit margins. That somewhere between that first night at the museum and now, this stopped being about debt and became about wanting a life that includes both of you in every meaningful way. Elena stepped closer, close enough to see the vulnerability in his eyes that he'd hidden behind authority and intellect for so long. Then ask me properly. No practicality, no security arrangements. Just honesty. Dr. Winters took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice carried none of the billionaire CEO confidence, just human hope and fear of rejection. Elena Martinez, will you marry me? Not because it's practical or strategic, but because I've fallen in love with you and with your extraordinary daughter, and I can't imagine my future without both of you in it. Yes, Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. To all of it. The wedding happened 4 months later, small and intimate, in the botanical gardens where Aria had discovered Japanese classes offered to visitors and had immediately understood every word without studying. Elena's family flew in from California, initially suspicious of the wealthy scientist but won over by his genuine awkwardness around social situations and obvious devotion to their daughter and granddaughter. They honeymooned as a family, 3 weeks in New Zealand where Aria collected Maori phrases and learned about indigenous language preservation efforts. Dr. Winters surprised them both by being terrible at traditional vacation activities, burning easily in the sun and getting hopelessly lost on simple hiking trails, but wonderful at pointing out unique ecosystems and explaining geological formations in ways that made science feel like magic. Years flowed past like water finding its course. Aria grew from precocious child to remarkable teenager to extraordinary young woman. Her gift evolved beyond simple language comprehension into something more nuanced, the ability to detect deception through linguistic inconsistencies, to understand cultural contexts that most translators missed, to perceive emotional subtexts that existed beneath surface conversations. At 16, she gave a presentation at a linguistics conference that challenged fundamental assumptions about how the human brain processes language. At 18, she published her first academic paper proposing new theories about universal grammar and innate language structures. Job offers poured in from intelligence agencies, tech companies developing AI translation systems, universities building cutting-edge linguistics programs. She declined them all, choosing instead to establish her own research foundation focused on language preservation for endangered indigenous cultures. Dr. Winters provided seed funding, but Aria insisted on independent operation, building something that belonged to her rather than existing as an extension of his legacy. The syndicate made 2 more attempts to exploit Aria's abilities over the years, both foiled by improved security protocols and Aria's own growing sophistication at detecting threats. The organization eventually shifted focus to easier targets, understanding that the Winters family had become too difficult and too costly to pursue. On a spring evening 12 years after that rainy night when everything changed, 3 generations gathered on the deck of the family home overlooking Puget Sound. Elena's mother told stories in Spanish while Elena translated nuances and Aria occasionally corrected both of them with affectionate humor, her comprehension extending to the unspoken family dynamics beneath the words. Dr. Winters watched his wife and daughter with contentment he'd never imagined possible during those lonely years building his empire. The research continued, the companies thrived, but they transformed from ends in themselves into means for creating the life he discovered he actually wanted. Happy? Elena asked, sliding her hand into his. Grateful, he corrected. For a 9-year-old girl who heard what others couldn't and had the courage to speak up. For her mother who saw past wealth to the lonely person underneath. For the family I never knew I needed until it found me. Aria glanced over, catching his words in both English and the emotional subtext that her gift allowed her to perceive. She smiled, then switched to Mandarin, the first language she'd ever heard him speak during an unguarded moment years ago when speaking with a colleague. Family isn't about biology or convenience, she said in perfect Beijing dialect. It's about who shows up when everything's falling apart and chooses to stay when it comes back together. We chose each other. That's the only thing that matters. As evening deepened into night and stars emerged above the water, 3 people who'd found each other through chance and crisis sat together in comfortable silence. Each understanding, in their own way and in their own language, what it truly meant to be home. The foundation Aria built went on to preserve 17 endangered languages that might otherwise have disappeared, documenting not just vocabulary and grammar but the cultural knowledge embedded in linguistic structures. Dr. Winters's neuroscience research evolved to incorporate Aria's unique insights about language processing, leading to breakthroughs in treating communication disorders and developing more sophisticated AI language systems. Elena's foundation programs became national models for poverty intervention, designed with the authenticity that came from someone who'd lived the struggle rather than just studied it. She spoke at conferences about the intersection of economic stability and human dignity, her perspective valued specifically because it came from genuine experience rather than academic theory. But their greatest achievement, the one they measured their lives by, wasn't documented in research papers or foundation reports. It was the ordinary moments that had once seemed impossible. Family dinners where conversation flowed between languages as naturally as breathing. Movie nights where Aria didn't need subtitles but watched them anyway because it amused her to spot translation errors. Holidays celebrated with Elena's family, Dr. Winters's research colleagues, and the strange extended network of people whose lives had intersected with theirs over the years. On Aria's 21st birthday, when she stood at the podium accepting an award for her preservation work, she spotted her parents in the front row. Her mother crying happy tears, her father beaming with pride that transformed his usually serious expression into something radiant. Later that evening, surrounded by friends and family and colleagues who'd become friends, Aria raised a toast in 12 different languages, each phrase carefully chosen to honor the various cultural traditions represented in the room. But she concluded in simple English, the language of her childhood and the words that mattered most. To unlikely families and second chances. to the courage it takes to speak up when it matters, to the people who see past surfaces to the person underneath, and to the truth that sometimes the most extraordinary gifts are simply opportunities to connect, to understand, to bridge the distances between human hearts. As glasses clinked and conversations resumed in a dozen languages that Aria understood with perfect clarity, she felt the weight of her gift settle into something she could finally name. Not burden or weapon or even talent. Just part of who she was, integrated and whole. The shadows that had once frightened her, the strange ability that had seemed isolating and dangerous, had become the very thing that connected her most deeply to the world. Her gift wasn't just about understanding words. It was about hearing what people meant beneath what they said, perceiving the full complexity of human communication, building bridges between cultures and contexts that others couldn't easily cross. And in that room full of people speaking languages from across the globe, Aria Martinez Winters finally understood the most important truth of all. That every language, stripped down to its essence, was ultimately trying to express the same fundamental human needs. Connection. Understanding. Love. Belonging. She'd spent years learning to hear those needs in every tongue humanity had invented. But it had taken family, chosen rather than given, built through crisis and maintained through daily choice, to teach her that hearing wasn't enough. You had to respond. You had to reach back. You had to close the distance your comprehension revealed. That was the real gift. Not understanding languages, but understanding people. Not hearing words, but hearing hearts. And in that understanding, in that hearing, in that connection, that was where the real translation happened. Where foreign became familiar. Where strangers became family. Where a lonely scientist, a struggling mother, and an extraordinary child became something none of them could have been alone. As the party continued into the night, Aria found herself standing between her parents, one hand in her mother's, the other in her father's, grounded by their presence while her mind soared across the conversations happening around her. She heard everything, understood everything, and finally, after all these years, accepted that this extraordinary ability wasn't meant to separate her from others but to connect her more deeply to the beautiful, chaotic, endlessly varied human family. In every language, in every dialect, in every accent and idiom and cultural context, people were ultimately saying the same thing in different ways. We are here. We matter. We want to be seen and heard and understood. And Aria, blessed and burdened with the gift of comprehension, spent her life translating that universal human truth into whatever language the moment required. That was enough. That was everything. That was home.